Some of my earliest gaming memories are back when I was 5 years old. And over the past 30 years, I have played countless games, and I want to share my top 10 of all time with you all. Don't forget to leave a like, pop a sub, and comment down below your favorite games in all of gaming, and let's get right into it. To those of you who may be new here, I normally create variety mobile gaming content where I show you mobile games that don't suck, but this is my monthly kind of episode of a Minty Mobile Games podcast where I talk about what I'm playing on mobile as well as other platforms, and then I talk about my viewpoints on gaming in general, YouTube, or content creation. Now, today I'm doing something very different for even the podcast episode where I share my top 10 favorite games of all time over 25 years of gaming ever since I was 5 years old, and just kind of share what I love about them and just kind of ramble and keep it raw and real like I normally do with the podcast. So, all right, stay tuned. We're going to hop straight into it. Excuse the crappier camera quality. I wanted to have my phone and look at it instead of using it to record. And so this is where I have the games. Now, I'm not going to be sharing them in any particular order, but they all have to be single player only. Now, if they do have a multiplayer component to them, I'm not taking them into account whatsoever. Now, let's just hop straight into it. These will be in no particular order. Number one, let's pick a random one. You know what? Let's just start with what the thumbnail is, and that is a screenshot from Firewatch, which is one of the most recent games I've played on this list. And it's probably the best value in gaming I've ever gotten. It was 99 cents on Steam. I knew eventually I wanted to play it for 99 cents. Literally, that's cheaper than practically anything you can get nowadays. Bought it and played it through on my Steam Deck in 2 sittings, about 2.5 hours per sitting. It's a pretty short game. If you're just like cruising through it, not really exploring, wanting to finish it as quick as possible, it's probably 4 hours. But if you're kind of meandering a little bit and kind of searching every nook and cranny, that's my playtime. Now, this game's art style is beautiful. It has my favorite soundtrack ever in the history of games, in my opinion. It's the only gaming soundtrack I listen to outside of the game itself. I've never been the type to pop up a game soundtrack other than like Halo, I think, is the only other one I can think of. But one guy created all the music for this game. It's incredible. I toss it up all the time. But what makes this game truly special is the dialogue and the dialogue options. Now, the dialogue is the most well done, believable dialogue I've ever experienced in gaming. I love the characters in this game. You play as a guy who basically tried to escape his regular life and by becoming a forest ranger. And so you're in a fire tower and you're on Firewatch, and it's basically him learning the day-to-day routine as a Forest Service person. And my grandpa was a Forest Service person. He retired in the Forest Service, actually. So it's just a really cool kind of twist into my real life. But this game just keeps you curious the whole time, because obviously it's about him adjusting to the job, but then also weird things start happening, and my curiosity just got the better of me. I could not put this game down. If you love story-based games, if you love great dialogue, if you love great characters, I also think that this is a perfect game from beginning to end, in my opinion. A lot of people hate the ending. I'm not going to spoil anything, of course, but I truly like the ending. That may be a hot take, but I think it's a realistic ending. So, moving on. That's just such a good game. I could talk about Firewatch forever. I could make probably an hour-long video. I just love the game inside and out. Now, NBA Street Volume 2. Now, that sounds kind of crazy, but if I could basically boil down my childhood into 3 different things, I loved video games, I loved Star Wars, and I loved basketball. That was my entire personality, and kind of still is basically my 3 traits of my personality. Now, I really, really loved basketball at this time, and one was super hot at the time too. I was at the age where I could really like get some moves down, and I loved learning new moves. And my mom like researched what was the best NBA Street volume to get or to play, and luckily everyone answered number 2, and they were right. This game is just so over the top. There's crazy game breaker moves that you can do, and it's just the satisfaction of creating your own basketball player, having them specialize in a certain thing like handles, shooting, or dunking, or whatever. And I always chose handles. Handles and sweet passes are everything when it comes to basketball, in my opinion, when it comes to what I enjoy out of it. And so you take your character and then you dominate all these local parks with their own street legends there. And once you beat the street legends, you can adopt their specialty too. And then by the end, you're just balling out, just having a great time. As far as arcade sports games go, this is the best of them all. I will die on that hill no matter what. It is a fantastic sports game. If there was any like series that I think they should bring back, it's like EA Big, like the wacky arcade sports games. Bring them back. I hate normal sports games, but man, NBA Street Volume 2, really good. Now, we're going to hit it really hard. This is probably my favorite game of all time, period, bar none. I won't be numbering any of these, but this is number 1. It's Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. Now, this game, we're not talking about the movie tie-in. We ignore that. That didn't exist. That never was a thing. Honestly, we after the first trilogy, we basically ignore everything from that point on. We don't acknowledge any of those. But this game back in the day on the original Xbox, I'll never forget. I still have the original copy as well. I bought it at GameStop on a whim. The box art looked sick. And this is back in the day when you didn't research online. You didn't know what you were getting. And I brought that home, and from beginning to end, yet another perfect game in my opinion. I think the only thing that has not held up over time is the combat. The combat definitely gets repetitive, and there's not a ton to it, but it still looks cool with the parkour. But the environmental puzzles in this game, the characters, the storyline, the graphics, the time-based mechanic with the Sands of Time, being able to rewind after you die. Just, this game was so far ahead of its time. The visuals still hold up to this day to a certain degree. It's really impressive. But again, the parkour and the environmental puzzles in this game, holy crap, so good. This is what made me a lifetime fan of the Prince of Persia series. That's why I still look into the newer games. Just, wow. Definite suggest. And again, a fun fact, Prince of Persia walked so that Assassin's Creed could run. Assassin's Creed would not exist without that game. Going into another one, let's see. Donkey Kong Country. Man, this is what made me love 2D platformers. Growing up, my family was pretty poor, and they didn't really want me to own my own gaming console. So literally my earliest memories until I was about 13 when I got a Game Boy Advance SP, I had never owned my own system. And so I would play on my cousin's systems, and his family still is very well off, and he had a Super Nintendo. And so some of my earliest gaming memories are on that Super Nintendo, and it was Donkey Kong, man. Donkey Kong and Super Star Wars. Oh my word, those games. But Donkey Kong Country specifically, I think it holds up perfectly over time. I still think the visuals look great. The difficulty is nothing to scoff at, especially if you're 100%ing it. This is one of the few games in my life that I've 100%ed every nook and cranny of it, like nothing left. The platforming, the co-op nature where you can have a friend play Diddy Kong, and obviously it's not at the same time, but it's still really fun. But as a 2D platformer, it doesn't get better than Donkey Kong Country. There's not much else to say. Also, another banger soundtrack, in my opinion. Like, a lot of YouTubers will use soundtracks from Donkey Kong in their videos, and for good reason. It's because, Donkey Kong Country is the GOAT, man. All right, Halo 3. Now, the same cousin that I was just talking about, whose family was pretty well off, I remember this was like very early on in the 360 life cycle, way before I got mine. And he got Halo 3 and just a stack of other games. And this was on Christmas Day. And I think it was either the Christmas Day or the day after. We literally did nothing but play the whole entire campaign split screen in Halo 3. And it was just such a crazy epic moment with Arbiter. I always thought it was so cool that Arbiter was like palling up with Master Chief in the co-op campaign. And just the Flood, one of the final levels. Like, I'm not spoiling anything because the game is so old at this point. Like, if you haven't played it, your fault, man. But the Flood level where you're like climbing the rings, and it's just... oh man, just from beginning to end, such a bombastic Halo 3 campaign, such a perfect ending to the trilogy. Holy crap, how much... I mean, who knew that Halo Reach was right on the horizon too? Man, what another good game. But it was all downhill from there. Halo 3, it also introduced Forge and all of these like crazy user-generated stuff, which made the multiplayer feel endless too. Just, impeccable. First-person shooter history. Golden Sun. You guys probably didn't see this one coming. Golden Sun is a phenomenal JRPG that was on the Game Boy Advance. I remember getting this game also on a whim. Like, that's the beauty of gaming back in the day, is you never knew what you were getting, and you would just happen upon some of the craziest hidden gems ever. Now, Golden Sun, I don't know if it was very popular at the time. I don't feel like it was. But now this game has quite a cult following, and for good reason. I remember feeling like this game was like a movie, man. Like the sounds that the game actually made your Game Boy Advance do were so impressive. No joke. And also with the storyline and the characters, the storyline, like for at the time, I thought it had some pretty cool plot twists and stuff. And it's not as original anymore. But just the characters and the writing were still very well done. The battle system is super good too, in my opinion, where you have these Djinns, or Djinns is how you pronounce it, I think, which is basically like a Pokemon, honestly, in its own way, that you could use for attacks as well. I just remember the battle system. I haven't played it in a long time, but the battle system I still feel would hold up today. And the characters, the storyline, everything. The game was split up into two pieces. I played and remember the first Golden Sun way more than the second, but the second was still just as good. I just remember the DS one being pitiful. So just consider the first one. I'm talking about Golden Sun 1. It's just called Golden Sun. Definitely in my top 10. I'm losing my voice. Sorry about that. Let's go with the Telltale Games, The Walking Dead Season 1. Now, back in the day, Telltale Games was still kind of making a name for themselves. Like, choose-your-own-adventure games weren't very plentiful either. Like, they had already came and went, and there hadn't been some for some time. Keep in mind, I'm still in the thick of loving Season 1 and 2 of The Walking Dead TV show, back before that went really bad too over time. But man, it was prime in its time. One of the best TV shows ever made. I don't care what anyone says. But the Season 1 of The Walking Dead Telltale Games was so good. It had the bond between Lee and Clementine, which is a little girl that you encounter right before the whole apocalypse starts happening full on. And it has kind of a the Last of Us feel, where you have that bond with her and you just want to protect her. And then the decisions you make truly influence at least who lives or dies in the game, adding a ton of replayability, a lot of different flavors. Now, obviously, your choices in the game when it first came out seemed way more significant than they actually are in hindsight. But again, the replayability of saving certain characters and seeing how far they would carry on through the season. Just the season as a whole was a masterpiece, I think, in like making you feel for these characters, being involved and immersed with these characters, as well as caring about them. Just impeccable, beginning to end, especially the ending. What a crazy note to leave on. If they left it at just that, I think people would reflect back on these games a lot more fondly. But since they didn't, but yeah, it just really got me back into. I loved reading choose your own adventure type books from like the 80s. Growing up, I really loved reading those. And these games are just a way of that. I already mentioned Firewatch, like more walking simulator, choose your kind of choices, at least with dialogue. I just love that kind of stuff. All right, let's go with Puzzle Quest Challenge of the Warlords. Ooh, big surprise. Those of you who watch this channel loyally or repeatedly or consistently, you guys know how much I love Puzzle Quest. But man, back in the day, I actually got this game at the same time that right before Christmas that year, and the time frame of Halo 3 that I already talked about. I went to Kmart. Yes, that dates me. I'm getting freakishly old, but this is back when Kmart was a thing. I bought Puzzle Quest Challenge of the Warlords because I thought the knight dude on the front of it just looked so sick, and I had no clue that it was an RPG mixed with a Bejeweled style match 3 gameplay. I loved Bejeweled. I would play it on my family's computer and my grandparents' computer. Whenever I would visit, I would play a lot of Bejeweled. And I had no idea. I loved role-playing games, obviously, from like Pokemon Blue and all this kind of stuff. And it would just perfectly mix the genres. It was so addicting. I don't even think I've ever technically beat the first game because I would always do all of the side quests and do the random battle function because the game could be tough as nails if you wanted it to be. But it's just such an interesting blend of genres that has not gotten old till this day. I will still pretty much try any match 3 RPG if it even shows a modicum of hope to be good, in my opinion. But such a good game. The DS was so good. I just have so many fond memories with the DS. I had the original one. I never got the Lite or anything like that. And the Game Boy Advance. I feel like both of their libraries just have so much good stuff. Love the GameCube, Super Nintendo, Xbox 360. Those are the systems that come to mind when, that I had a lot of time with. But I only owned an Xbox 360, a Game Boy Advance, and a DS. Those are the only ones I personally owned. Everything else I played on my grandparents or cousins or whatever. But that's all kinds of unneeded information for you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below what systems you hold the fondest memories for. I'm very curious to know. Let's move on to The Force Unleashed. Oh my goodness. The Force Unleashed, as a Star Wars fan, my entire life, literally my earliest memories are with Star Wars that I can think of. As soon as I saw the advertisements for Force Unleashed, they were brilliant with the advertisements too. I just knew it was like always my dream to have a video game where the Force is just cranked up to 11 and it just takes it to a whole new level. The storyline integrates how the rebellion got their symbol just flawlessly, and it's just brilliant how it stands on its own 2 feet while not relying solely on previous Star Wars memorabilia. I loved the game. You can be so creative with the Force too. Is it technically a hard game? Not really. It's honestly a breeze, but it's like the power trip, the power fantasy with the Force that you get out of Force Unleashed. It's never been topped. I feel like people would reflect better on this series as a whole if the second one wasn't so short and kind of unneeded. If they just left it after the first one, I feel like it just made more sense. It's not as a cheesy kind of workaround to keep the series going. I wish they would have stopped after the first game. But to this day, I truly believe that there has been no better Force powers than in The Force Unleashed. It was very close between this and Battlefront 2. So don't get too mad at me that I didn't include a Battlefront game instead when it comes to Star Wars, but it was very close. Metroid Zero Mission. This game single-handedly made me start enjoying and realizing that Metroidvanias were a thing. It was this and Dawn of Sorrow. It was between these two games, but I came upon Dawn of Sorrow later in the DS. But obviously on the Game Boy Advance, I had this game. Didn't realize it was a remake of Super Metroid. Had never played that on the Super Nintendo, despite me growing up with my cousin's Super Nintendo. This game was just so good. The exploration, the power-ups. It does have a light story to it. I remember the twist midway through. Spoiler warning, just jump ahead. But I'm about to say, When Samus loses her suit, so you go from just feeling super equipped, super not like you're not scared of anything, and then obviously it turns into almost like a stealth horror game where you can only freeze enemies and just run away and just try to get your suit back. I love that little twist to it. Such a good game. Another one of the few games that I have 100%ed, explored the entire game. Such a good Metroidvania. That one, Dawn of Sorrow, is definitely one of my favorites as well. Hollow Knight, of course, but I think Hollow Knight's a little overrated in my opinion. Again, don't kill me. But those are some of my favorites. But yeah. So, is there any that I have missed? I think that is all 10, if I am not mistaken. Yeah, it is. We made it. We made it through. Now, keep in mind, I think there was about 3 to 4 of these that were very iffy. Like, there were other games that I could have slotted in that were basically tied, but I just had to take my gut instinct. These were the first ones that came to mind when I kind of thought about it for a day. I just thought it would be really fun to talk about because I've never really talked about my favorite games of all time on another platform other than mobile. Now, I do need to do an updated mobile list, and if you guys didn't know, I actually put out a video of my favorite mobile games of all time. I think it was top 10 as well. But if you guys want me to make this kind of a regular occurrence for the podcast too, where I just talk about my top 10s of certain types of games or whatever, I'm totally down. Multiplayer games would be vastly different from these, obviously. And I'm a huge multiplayer gamer, way more multiplayer gamer than single player gamer, for sure, especially in adulthood. That's almost exclusively what I play outside of indie games. So I'd love to know your guys' thoughts if you made it to this point in the video. Thank you so much. I appreciate the little cult-like following the podcast episodes have. My last podcast episode did just as good as my normal content, which just blows my mind. I really enjoy yapping, as you guys can probably tell. I can talk for, 20 minutes to myself. Pretty wild. But I do hope you guys got something out of it. Appreciate your guys' support. Leave a like, pop a sub, all of that jazz. Comment down below anything about anything that I talked about. I'd really appreciate it. I hope you guys are staying safe and take it easy.